Hello, everyone. My name is Krina Viju-Milošević, and I'm a professor in the Institute of European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies at Carleton University. I'm also the academic coordinator of the War in Ukraine Observatory. For our War Observatory project, we are conducting interviews with experts on various perspectives related to the war in Ukraine. And just to mention that the main intent of these interviews is to be used as teaching material and, of course, in the public debate. And today I have the pleasure of having here with me Dr. Yevgeniya Gaber, who is a Ukrainian foreign policy expert and a non-resident senior fellow at the Center in Modern Turkish Studies at Norman Paterson School of International Affairs, Carleton University, as well as a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Prior to this, Yevgeniya worked as a foreign policy advisor to the Prime Minister of Ukraine until 2021, as a deputy director of the Diplomatic Academy at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine between 2018 and 2020, as the second secretary in political affairs in the Embassy of Ukraine in Ankara between 2014 and 2018, and as an assistant professor at the International Relations Department of Odessa National Mechnikov University, where she taught courses on Turkish studies between 2009 and 2014. I would move on a bit to a bit more advanced questions, I would say. And the first is related to the developments that we see during these past 9 months. I mean, I cannot believe we are in the 9th month of the war. How do you assess the evolution in the war events, and as well, what would be, in your opinion, the best case scenario of the war to end? What would be the something that Ukrainian society would accept as an end to this war?
Well, I think the main result of this 9 months of the war is a collapse of this image of great Russia, which cannot be defeated, which cannot lose this war. And this is also the crash of all illusions on how Russia blackmailed the whole world for many, many years with its force threatening with the use of nukes, nuclear power, actually now taking hostages people who work in the nuclear power plants, as well as threatening the world with the use of nuclear weapons and nukes. And using the same arguments of blackmail and weaponizing everything that Russia can weaponize. Refugees, food security, gas, energy resources. So one of the main developments, geopolitically speaking, I would say the very eye-opening experience of having Russia not as a great Russian empire or the great Soviet Union to be afraid of, but rather a state with a very weakened economy, with the armed forces and different formations, paramilitary formations, which are completely demotivated and which have no morale and motivation to fight in Ukraine, because they don't understand why they are fighting, what they are fighting for in Ukraine. And of course, understanding that the main principle of any international agreement is that those agreements and commitments have to be kept. And this is not the case with the Russian Federation, because unfortunately in these years we have seen Russia violating any kind of bilateral and multilateral treaties, undermining the world order that we had, the rules-based world order, international law, Budapest Memorandum, bilateral treaties with Ukraine, United Nations Charter, so you name it, anything, it has been violated by Russia. So when we, and on the other hand, of course, we have a highly motivated Ukrainian people who fight for their own territories and who also fight for their own people living on the occupied territories. So when I get questions on how Ukraine, not being a NATO member, not even having Navy in the Black Sea and having 40 million of population, can successfully fight back and even now have these counter-offensives against Russia, which is a nuclear power, which is a great power, and which is something like 140 million people there, I always answer that because we have Ukrainian forces of 40 million people, civilians and military people, trying to protect their own territory, their own land, their own country. And for us, this is an independence war. Plus, of course, the way of fighting this war using creative solutions, Western support, very new modern technologies, tactics, and strategy in fighting this war. This all helps. So answering the question on what can be the solution to this war, or the best case scenario for this war, I would say that for any Ukrainian, 98% of Ukrainians actually say that they support our liberation war until getting back to the borders of 1991. There is a clear understanding that letting Russia get away with what it has cost in Ukraine and just going back to the borders of pre-24th of February this year, and then having ceasefire and freezing this conflict is not a solution. First, because people of Ukraine cannot live in the occupied territories. They are being tortured to death. They are being killed by the Russian armed forces and all kind of private military companies. So there is no way of freezing the conflict just because there will be a genocide. This is a genocidal war, which is important to understand. There will be a genocide on the occupied territory. So we do have to get those territories back, including Crimea and including the east of Ukraine. Second, which is important, is having an international tribunal for the war crimes and everyone who committed war crimes in Ukraine during these months of invasion, starting from political leadership, higher political leadership, up to those perpetrators who were carrying out mass atrocities, rapings, tortures in the different regions of Ukraine. Third, this is about the cost of the damage caused by Russia. In Ukraine, we appreciate a lot the support of our international partners, Canada, European Union, the United States, but there is an understanding that Russia has to pay those reparations, that assets of Russian oligarchs and anyone who was involved in this war have to be frozen and then to be used as a part of the fund for the restoration and the sustainable development of Ukraine. And that's another thing. All prisoners, all people who have been taken hostages have to be released. And I don't only speak here about the military or soldiers of Ukraine, but also about civilians, because we have these acts of deportation of civilians, forceful deportation, when children are being separated from their parents, and a couple of millions of Ukrainians just have been deported to Russia to change the demographic situation on the ground in Ukraine. And last point, which is also important here, is having, if not guarantees, security guarantees for Ukraine before or if Ukraine becomes the NATO member, but at least having a new mechanism of providing security to those countries in the region like Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, who want to follow their independent democratic path, but are not yet members of the collective security organizations like NATO. So when those five conditions are in place, I think that would be the best case scenario for Ukraine.
And thank you so much for outlining them very, very clearly. So I would end the interview with a question. I think it's addressing more your expertise in terms of the Ukrainian foreign policy, and without trying to be speculative, what are, in your opinion, the long-term goals of the Ukrainian foreign policy?
Well, first and foremost, I think that Ukraine has made it clear from the very beginning, Ukrainian foreign policy has to be independent and quite self-confident, one based on Ukraine's own resources. We always talk, and we talk very often about partnerships with different countries, membership in different organizations. But I think now the main change in Ukrainian mentality and also in the international perception of Ukraine is that Ukraine is an asset in itself. It's not a liability in terms of security. It's not only recipient of Western support and assistance. It is a contributor to the European and Euro-Atlantic security. So this major change in self-perception, and I think generally public perception of Ukraine, is really crucial. So for us as Ukraine, what we as Ukrainian foreign policy experts have been discussing a lot is that finally we have this agency in international relations, which I started from in my first answer, when we are not an object of the foreign policy of other countries or international relations, but a subject. And this is how we are going to proceed, being very clear and very sincere with our partners about our own interests and about the fact that by helping Ukraine or by cooperating Ukraine, you're not investing in Ukraine only, or you're not doing some charity to Ukraine. It's also about investing in collective European and Euro-Atlantic security. So Ukraine's priority number one will be to become a very self-confident power in international relations, having its own alliances, its own interests, but of course abiding by international law and rules and being a part of the European and Euro-Atlantic community. Second objective, which is very much connected and closely related to the first one, is becoming a full member of the European Union and NATO. We have been very clear about our aims. We have this now also in the Ukrainian constitution, having this as an aim and objective to become full-fledged member. We realize very well that it's a long path to take, that it's quite a difficult one, that we still need to have certain reforms and we still need to have certain changes probably. But the final goal is very clear. We are a European state, and we have suffered so much also to prove that we are not only somewhere on the margins of the EU or NATO, but we are one of the European family members. So I think this will bring a lot of advantages both to Ukrainian people and also to the NATO nations and the European Union, because we, as I mentioned, again, we are the only army in the world now who has this combat experience of fighting against Russia on the battlefield, but also this soft power of being a model of democratic transformations for many other countries in the world and in the region. Last thing, and I think this is also important, is Ukraine's example of changing dynamics in the regional environment, but also in the international world order. It's pretty clear now that the whole system that we had in the United Nations, for example, when such countries as Russia and China have veto power in the Security Council and thus a chance to block any decisions taken there, that such mechanisms in NATO and the European Union, when any country again can block any process because there is a need for unanimity in any voting, and then you might have some illiberal powers inside these organizations which block the membership for more liberal and democratic countries just because of their own pragmatic interests. This all has to be changed. So I think in a way, not to be very pathetic about that, but one of the missions that Ukraine sees for itself is also to play this role in reforming and adapting the international world order and organizations to the current realities, and to prove that democracy and liberalism is not a synonym to being toothless and not united and weak and just being blackmailed by other illiberal forces. You not only have to talk about democracy, but also be able to protect your democracy. And in case of Ukraine, it's not only about values versus interests. It's also values and interests that make everyone unite around Ukraine now and actually protect and defend this civilizational choice that we have all made for ourselves.
Yevgenia, on this hopeful note, I'll thank you for your time today. Thank you for providing very important insights into the war in Ukraine and the vision of the Ukrainian society. And we hope that we get to speak in better times, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you so much.